So, as usual, we begin with a prayer for teacher and student. You can join me if you like. Om Sahanavadu Sahanau Gunatu Sahavi Karava Stomavit Vishavai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. That is, nourish our learning. May we work together with a great deal of enthusiasm and energy. May our study be rewarding and illuminating. May we not unnecessarily argue or cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So it's nice to be with you after something like a long break. And as usual, Sunday is dedicated to question-answer sessions. So I have a question in text, but before I deal with that, I just open the floor, as it were, and see if there are any questions that you want to ask. And I'll mute my microphone in case you want to formulate and express any question.
Swamiji, maybe I can ask a question. So my question is regarding, so what is self-realization or Atmagyan? So I understand that this is an event, not a process. So this is something that happens. And then I understand that probably there is a difference between this and the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And I understand that this is also not the same as seeing and feeling the divine everywhere. So I just wanted to understand what's the difference between these different things and what exactly is self-realization.
Okay, so thank you. And I'll deal with that question. I also deal with the question written to me in text as well. And I think the questioner is here as well. So maybe we can combine the two answers. So it says, you, that means me, have often emphasized about playing the game of life many times. In this context, there's a quote from Towards the Goal Supreme by Swami Purnananda Maharaj, who was a distinguished disciple of Swami Vivekananda and was a president of the Ramakrishna Matan Mission and had a long beard, much longer than mine. He says, if you have to be in the world at all, make God your world. This is the quotation. If you have to be in the world at all, make God your world. Set up your home with him. Whatever you do, see or hear, think that to be God. It is all play, a game with him. Know life to be a game in which Mother herself is the player and you are her playmate. The world will be quite different when you know that Mother is playing with you. So one day, on day-to-day life is the question, how do we play the game when we go through good and terrible moments? It's easier when the bad moments are tolerable, but when something very bad happens, what is our interpretation of playing the game? Even in those very bad moments, and you have also said, above chat, that God is not an examiner. If the terrible moments are not for testing, how do we understand that game? You see, from a purely psychological point of view, it is not how we would play a game, or how we would deal with life, or how we would be positive, or how we would find a purpose. I suppose if we were truly honest, the real valid question from a psychological point of view is, how would we ever get out of bed at all and not just stay there? Because our kind of biologically natural position would be to take the easiest road, to take the most comfortable position. After all, the various animals that hibernate during the winter, why should we not? If we have the opportunity to do it, apart from the practical fact that we all have to go to work and make a living and that kind of thing. And then why do people take drugs or alcohol? Well, the more valid question might be, why should we not be taking it all the time? Because, it's a way out of what seems to be something like a struggle. And if we view the world as it's sometimes good and sometimes bad, or sometimes pleasurable or sometimes not, or sometimes happy and sometimes sad, we have a distorted view of the world because it introduces wishful thinking. Wishful thinking means, I wish it was always joyful and happy. But when we analyze it properly, as say, Gautama Siddhartha, otherwise known as the Buddha, did, we find it's largely pain and largely unhappiness with a few sparkling moments of happiness. If we really truly wish to analyze it from a clinically psychologically point of view, we'll find that we are desperately trying to find those moments of happiness, but largely we're struggling against pain. And so our strategy is, let us move away from painful moments, maybe move away from what we interpret as a negative and move toward the positive. But it's purely a human understanding from a psychological point of view. And as far as we know, there are some basic animals that don't have that evaluation of things. It's purely, let me survive. Now, nature has introduced an element of pleasure for us. For example, if eating food was not a pleasurable thing, then we would never gain any nourishment. But what we find to be pleasure in food is not what a crocodile finds to be pleasurable, or what a chameleon finds to be pleasurable. Otherwise, we'd be ambushing insects and eating those. Or we would be eating what pigs eat, or we'd be eating grass and so on. Nature has designed a specific, if you want to call it this, a specific formula for each one. We're all constitutionally different. When I say all, I mean every species is different. And then in terms of individualities, all of these are different as well. And so your happiness is not necessarily my happiness, but there's a general sense of happiness that is orientated around the mental faculty that takes in sense pleasure. And we know that those same senses bring in pain as well. We know that the skin exposed on a beautiful sunny day will enjoy the rays of the sun. But we also know that when we fall down or scratch ourselves, then the skin itself is being affected. A wound occurs, and internally there's a mechanism that knows how to heal that. And that's important, because if it happens, if there's an internal healing mechanism for physical, there's an internal healing mechanism for the psychological, for the emotional, and it is already within us. It is not something that we have to go and get. There's no supermarket that we go and buy happiness from. So, what the ancient rishis, when we say rishis, those who see the truth, those who have an insight into their own internal self, and those will characterize it as not just a reality, not just truth, not just a permanence, but they will see that it is immune from these two pushing and pulling faculties of pleasure and pain. They know that it somehow transcends that and leaves us feeling a blissful moment, because our real nature we can describe as a blissful base. And blissful base you can interpret as our home. Other people say that kingdom of heaven that is within what? Within us or amongst us, maybe a different interpretation. In other words, it's imminent, it's here, it's now. We don't have to go and get it. So when we value the world as sometimes it's tough and sometimes it's happy, sometimes it's joyful and sometimes it's not, we can see that these valuations are contrasts. And the contrasts are necessary, otherwise we'd have no valuations at all. We wouldn't understand what is goodness unless there is bad or evil. The world is evil, some people say. No, the world is not evil, but there is certainly evil within it, and that is necessary. You cannot understand what is light unless there's shade, and we prefer the light, there's no doubt. We prefer everything that is there. And then we have to understand a unity of existence. What does a unity of existence mean? That what we experience on the physical, we experience on the psychological, and we experience on the spiritual. Because we can think of this as a kind of hierarchy. And if I'm using the expression blissful base, we say, okay, there's a base, and built on the base, what we call a substrate. There's a final substrate, a final foundation on which everything else is built. Now, if you have a building, the foundation is made from, let us say, cement, and it is made from certain building materials and components, but the top floor has the same building components, just variations. Supposing we study a tree, you surely must have noticed that every leaf has the same configuration as the tree itself. There's a central stem, there's a central piece, and there are branches from it. So the ancient sages would have noticed that. The ancient yogis would have classified these as different kinds of bodies. A morphological body, for example, containing energy, as it were. A physical body containing food, made from food. They'll find a mental body made from subtle energy. They'll find an intellect that is a kind of subtle covering between this reality, this Atma Jyoti, and what is there presented in front of us. And so, although we value things in this way, it also gives us a clue to our fundamental nature. And it's not that we have to attain anything. It is already present. It's a very fundamental lesson that we have to learn, that it's not something that is there destined for the future or something that we have to work toward. It is something that we are unfolding toward. And the modern word for this is evolution. We are growing toward this, if you want to express it in this way, because there's an inner urge that is pushing us from within, and there's a perfection that seems to be drawing us from without. So, and we all want perfection. From our present state of understanding, we have to ask what would be, let's say, the nature of this goal, if we were to describe it in those terms. And we can indicate it by the term Brahman. Or we can have three terms. We can have, according to Taittiriya Upanishad, Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. That is existence or truth, knowledge, and infinity. This is how it's classified in Taittiriya Upanishad, the second section and the first subsection, and the verse is also the first. You can say 2-1-1. So the natural thing is to expect that this goal is realized at the end of a period of evolution in time. And logically then it must have been involved so that it could flow out in time. This is the involved version. And Swami Vivekananda makes a point of this in his Jnana Yoga lectures. You cannot have something that is evolving unless it is involved in the whole process. Unless there's a substrate that other things are built on, that is actively involved in the process, you cannot have the evolution. You cannot have a fully grown tree without the involved seed as an entity, and then its capacity to develop and grow. You know, sometimes you find these time-lapse pictures where you can see from a seed small shoots, small sprouts. And because it's over such a long period of time, you can photograph each stage and then put them all together and speed it up. And you'll see it looks as if it's happening very quickly. First a sprout, first maybe one or two stems within it. And then from that some opening, and then a small leaf appears on the top of the soil, very tiny, and then something more growth happens. Given that all the resources around it for growth are available, and it grows and grows, you wouldn't suspect that it comes out as a huge oak tree that gives shade to everything. And yet, this is how it is. So something must be inside it to make it happen. And in other words, it must be an abiding entity that is unaffected by the three aspects, by time and space and motion as a complex. And so what's appearing as evolution, what's appearing as good and bad and tough times and easy times and so on and so forth, it must be really a display of the truth. It must be refracted by the medium of expression, which is namely time and space and motion. These three things. And it must be more or less like the presentation, let's say, of a rainbow, which appears as something, and we know it appears. When the clouds stand in a specific relation to the sun and the observer, we see a rainbow. But if the observer goes above the clouds, as we do, say, in an airplane, we will not see any rainbow. And instead, we see the mother of all colors, the sun shining. We'll see white light. Not excluding, only because our range of vision is like that. We won't say infrared, we won't say ultraviolet. But supposing we manage to station ourselves above this space-time complex, what would we perceive from there? And if that's our nature, we can do it. And surely we would be blessed with an all-comprehensive vision of everything, a transcendent vision. And this really would be an internal sight of knowledge. And when we remain there and nothing else exists, we call this Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Nirvikalpa, there's no kalpa cycle. There's no motion, there's no time, there's no space. These components are not there. And we have a close experience to it. Let us say in moments of meditation, maybe for a flash for many, and maybe when that is rehearsed more and more, we have more of a permanent condition. And when we ultimately realize that and understand it and remain there happily, self-realization is there, but self-realization may not be necessarily a permanent condition. We can have flashes of self-realization, and when it is of a permanent type, then we call this really nirvikalpa. There's no cycles, no going back. We're like the salt doll that enters into the ocean and dissolves itself into the ocean and never comes back. And for most people, that's unsatisfactory because it's equivalent to self-annihilation. And so along with this realization, self-realization, will come the realization, well, I'm not this actually. And therefore, there's no loss or gain. When I take away my central identity, my individuality, the consciousness, in the example, I am the rainbow. When we take that away, and I'm the observer, and I'm above the clouds, and I'm one with the source of the whole light, the whole spectrum, including infrared, ultraviolet, everything, that sense of oneness is irrevocable, unless you have a special case of it. Special case of it means unless you are a special wave that comes up, like a Ramakrishna, or like a Krishna, or like a Jesus, or like a Buddha, where you don't want to disappear because you have a central purpose. You're part of as it were, you are the cosmic balancing power that has come down, descending. Avatar means one that descends, comes down, and does some good to the world, and goes back, but never under the misapprehension of ignorance. So self-realization means I'm realizing what is already there once ignorance is gone. Once ignorance is gone, it becomes self-evident. It's not like I'm here and I want perfection there, or I'm here and I want a heaven somewhere else. No. I feel, and we all feel, this identity of self. It's just that we have attached the time, space, motion aspect, which produces our impression. I am the body, I am the mind-body complex, etc. The psychophysical, if you will. So there's no need to violate our integrity. We are just expressing the glory within the field where refraction becomes a possibility as an enjoyable game or a sport. Because once we realize that and engage back in the world, it's once you have discovered yourself. Ramakrishna gives a beautiful example. If you're going to a foreign city and you have some baggage, well, why don't you find your hotel, your place where you're going to stay, put your bags comfortably there, and then you have the freedom to enjoy the city, knowing that your bags are safe. So knowing that you are exactly this perfection that we call Brahman, or that the Taittiriya Upanishad calls Satyam, Jnanam, and Anantam, or other Upanishads will express that as existence and consciousness and bliss. It equates to the same thing. Once you understand that that is fundamentally your nature, then if it's your nature, wherever you look, you'll find it. It must be there everywhere. And then if you ask, well, what is the purpose of it? You'll understand, meaningless question. There's no purpose in life. There's no purpose in this. A localized purpose, no doubt, is there. But as part of a game, as part of a sport, and we are free then to enjoy it. So on day-to-day life, how do we play the game? The game is the day-to-day life. And how to play it? You play it with the certainty that this is so. And because it's unfamiliar, an unfamiliar way of looking at it, because we're looking at it through the lens of time and space and motion, because we're doing that, we have to have a full grounding, conviction. There can be no other reason why there is something called life, unless it's a game of waves, unless we are surfing on the ocean of life. And we forget it. Naturally, we forget it because life seems to be a reality. So there was a question, when was it? It was in a conversation with a devotee yesterday, you see. And they're talking about faith and they're talking about reality. And when they say reality, they're saying it in the same kind of way that a reductionist materialist is using it. And this is a student of the Vedanta philosophy, thinking that when I wake up and open my eyes, presumably the person who opens it normally is away on holiday, and I see the world and I review it either in a good way or a bad way. Maybe I prefer the bed, or maybe I'm enthusiastic to go to a workplace. But whatever it is, that is reduced to this world is reduced to one term, reality. And the philosopher will tell you, not just from an intellectual point of view, from a practical point of view, if it is a reality, how come it changes? It cannot be. It has to be. A reality must be something that is always real. It never changes. It is always there. It is not subject to these factors because there's a constant observer that is able to observe it all. And when that gets mixed up with the framework of time and space and motion and events and personalities and sickness and health and the weather, it's a well-known fact that in some countries, let's say, in the Arctic areas where there are long days in the summer and short days in the winter, not even short days, there are no days in the winter. It's all nightfall and dark. We know that the mood goes down, the mood gets depressed. And when the sun comes out, in Zimbabwe, I was always puzzled by songs that glorified summer, you know. There's one song when I was a young man, uh, you know, we're all going on a summer holiday, you know. What is this all about? Because in Zimbabwe, I suppose it's all summer. So this becomes our life and becomes our reality. And self-realization is a realization, no, there's much more to this. And when we engage in the self-realization, and when that becomes self-evident, it's not that the other goes away, it becomes revalued. Because we understand that what we call the life is really an expression of the glory within the field where refraction becomes a possibility and becomes an enjoyable game, an enjoyable sport, which means we have to take a sporting attitude. So let us go back to what was referred to. The quotation goes like this: if you have to be in the world at all, let's analyze this. We have to be in the world. And the alternative is to resort to the psychological withdrawal that says, I never want to get out of bed. This is depression, of course. I never want to get out of bed. And it's disguised as just a sense of comforting or whatever it is. And we have to be in the world. If we have to be in the world at all, if that's our condition and we have no choice about it, and none of us have a choice about it, then he says, make God your world, not put God somewhere in your world, but make the whole world nothing more than this one entity that here he's calling God, and elsewhere is called other things. We can call it Brahman, or we can call it this threefold term of Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, whatever term we like to use. Set up your home with him. In other words, you should feel at home in this world, because this world and this entity that we call infinite visible or Brahman or God is one and the same thing. And Sri Ramakrishna, for example, understood this so fully that people criticized him. What kind of sage is this? Is this really a rishi? He goes and he's able to enjoy the cinema or the theater. He's able to go and enjoy the zoo. Even he finds delight on the Maiden in Calcutta, the ground there. He finds delight in nature, in the birds and the trees. And he finds delight in a person's face, not just a child's face, not selectively, but every face. As soon as he sees eyes, he says, there you are, mother. Mother, you're there. And why mother? It's because the world is seen to be an expression of energy, and energy is, from way back, deemed to be feminine. Just to make a distinction, if there should be a distinction. And so, for example, that comes through in the theology, in Hindu theology, it comes through as Shiva Shakti, it comes through as, these pairs of opposites, and it comes through in conventional Christianity as the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, coming from an ancient Jewish idea, the Ruach, the breath that moves against the waters, the thing that infuses life. The thing that infuses life is what we call energy. Everything is resolved back into energy, and we don't know what it is. We only know the thing that makes things move. It must be deeply infused into nature and therefore expressed as nature. Modern science comes to our rescue in all of these things. It says everything is reduced to energy. Einstein's equation, probably the most well-known equation in the world, simple equation, E equals mc squared. We can add the c squared if we like. In other words, energy is more subtle than matter, and matter is an expression. It's an equivalence. It's an equivalence, not often read like that, but it's an equivalence equation. Whatever we see is nothing more than energy. How will we conceive of it? We conceive of it in material sense as maybe waves within a field. And we can reduce all that to one. The beauty about modern science, when I say modern science, 100 years old, is that electricity was noticed, magnetism was noticed, and it all came together, electromagnetism. And then it was seen that the photons are there, and they're not different. They're within the same field, the electromagnetic field. And therefore photons, it is all back to this. And so it's a variation within the field. It's another wavelength within the field, along with gamma rays and X-rays and infrared and ultraviolet. And what we see is only a narrow band of it. We can't see all the others. It's all right. With instruments, we can pick them up. So now it's reduced to one thing again. And then where does all that come from? Well, some may say a gravitational field is space. And so it all goes back to unity, is what I'm saying. So one energy is there. One energy is there. And Swami Vivekananda noticed this and challenged Nikola Tesla, can you please find out a mathematical formula that will please express this, what the ancient yogis understood. Now, if you go back further, is there a further? Is there something that is beyond this framework? Is like saying, is there something beyond the rainbow? Is there something above the clouds? Is there something transcendent? Yes, there is. And when we see that, all the other things disappear. And you cannot have these running in parallel. You cannot have this world and the state of transcendence. And self-realization we can characterize in a slightly different way. Well, I realized it. Having realized it, I've put my baggage somewhere, and now I can go into the world. A self-realized soul, not eliminating the world, not cutting it off, but fully engaging it. How? Like a game, having a completely different view on life. In other words, to such a person who understands this, a self-realized person, they will not use the language that is posed in this question, that when we go through good and terrible moments, these are registered as highs and lows in a wave system. And yes, it is natural to register them in this way, but there's nothing to stop us from registering these temporarily and then reformulating with the whole idea, with all our background, supported fully by modern science, yet we forget it because our reality is reduced to the wave system and we take it seriously. But when we shift our point of view, it is the art of shifting the point of view. When we learn the art of shifting the point of view, what looks like a threat, what looks like a fearful situation, becomes something like a great sporting game, and we don't ask that these so-called previously classified terrible moments be relieved from us. We go toward it with a kind of adventurous, challenging way. Come on. You're presenting this to me, but I recognize you. Lord, you are there, dressed up as energy, as Shakti. And so, in the words of Ramakrishna, it would be an enjoyment of Nitya, the eternal, and its Leela, its play. On the one side, the eternal. On the other side, its play. And these are not different. Life as we register it and the Supreme are not different. They're all one. And that leads us to the highest possible conclusion of Advaita. Now, when you are involved and experience non-dualism, not just as a principle, then the Leela goes away. And if you're only immersed in the Leela, the Nitya goes away. And if you're self-realized, you'll understand the two. And they are compatible. They're not distinctly different. So the movement of, or sport of the infinite, of course, is followed by these 5 subtle elements, these tanmatras. And at one point, this Atmajnana comes, that is this knowledge of the Atman, which is the same as self-realization. And this is different from a Nirvikalpa Samadhi experience where we are immersed in the Nitya, the eternal, which means there is nothing else There's only this oneness. And so this is the distinction that we are making. That's the answer to the one question. And so let's go on with this written question here. Set up your home with him. Whatever you do, see or hear. This is a beautifully phrased written text, It says, whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you think, because our world is primarily to do with seeing and hearing. Hearing is all to do with registering our environment, including conversation. And what we see is part of that, our interpretation of the world, bearing in mind that what is missing from seeing and what is missing from hearing is the infrared and the ultraviolet. Bees can see the ultraviolet, by the way. And there are certain animals that can see the infrared. But we ourselves, we can't see either of these things. So within our narrow band of seven colors, our standard view, our rainbow view of things, our narrow band of experience. So whatever we see within that band, and whatever we hear that's excluding ultrasonic or subsonic and supersonic, that's outside our range of hearing. Dogs can hear the one range because it's all to do with frequencies. And if our instruments are not tuned to those particular frequencies, we won't catch it. And how do we catch it? Because there's a thinking mechanism also. Whatever we see or hear or think, whatever we see or hear, not think, whatever we see or hear, think that to be, and he uses the word God. I had a conversation this morning saying in certain countries you don't like the word God. Okay, that's fine. You use some other term. We know what it means. It means that on a certain level in the relativistic world, it is that which is responsible, or that which is involved in the evolutionary process of change. And it is a substrate for everything, like the roots of a tree. Without the roots, there's no tree. But the tree itself is an expression of the roots. And so we see that same thing unfolding, as it were. And we may call that, if we like, God, or we may call that the infinite invisible. The terms are not really meaningful for everybody, so you select your own terms about it. I've suggested Brahman, and I've suggested these threefold terms, possibly Satyam, Jnanam, and Antam. Whatever expression you have is a concept. Now, when it ceases to be a concept, when it becomes a tangible reality, we call this self-realization. So whatever you do, whatever you see or hear, whatever you do with the hands, whatever activity you're involved in, whatever you see, whatever you hear, think that that is that total entity that religion calls God. And it's all play. It's a game with him, because from that point of view, it's a game. From the Lord's point of view, it's a game. And you may say, well, it's not a very good game. It's a malicious game because people are suffering. Yes, all right. People are suffering. But just declaring it won't solve the problem. And also bypassing it won't solve the problem. Saying, well, life is temporary, it'll be gone in 1,000 years. That's of no use to somebody who's suffering. But at least to say, okay, some cause is there. We don't have to explore what is the exact cause. We know that broadly is threefold. That is, it's your own karma, that is your own consequence within the framework of the law of causality, caused by you, by wrong thinking. Wrong thinking. When we say your karma, we are saying your wrong or right thinking. Whatever it is, it's your thinking that has produced a condensation of it in the world and is presented as the world. And secondly, maybe somebody else's wrong thinking against you, or maybe it is just how the world is, because this whole play does not work without division. That means it doesn't work without space, and it doesn't work without fragmentation, and it doesn't work without individualities, and it doesn't work without motion. And registering motion is what we call time. None of this works without these three factors. And so, yes, things will pass and so on. But how do we deal with it? Well, in terms of the first sense of the causality, that is our own, we can change our own thinking. We can shift our own thinking immediately. We don't have to wait for it. Because time, which is part of the framework, is giving us an opportunity. Here's one opportunity. Let's call it a moment of time. Call it a second, if you will. And the second is another second is presented, another moment of time, a fragment, a unit. And thought works so rapidly, maybe we don't have time to put something of our own in. So we have to be patient. We have to see, okay, what are our unconscious reactions that are coming up? Let it come, let it go. Do it, have a friendly disposition toward all of these things. Come if you want. Stay if you can. Have a cup of tea and go if you must. But once you've gone, there's a vacancy. Like a boarding house. The guest is gone, another vacancy is there, bed and breakfast. Come on, come and have some bed and breakfast with me, and I'll put you in. You're going to be my best guest. You're going to be the most perfect guest, and you make a series of those. Come on. Strength and truth and beauty and goodness and love and harmony and all that you put in. And then you see, with a brand new vision, a brand new set of eyes, that what we are seeing, what we are hearing, and what we are doing is within a framework of subtle waves, and we call these tanmatras. These are expressions of subtle matter and subtle energy acting on it and so on. We call these tanmatras. And you'll see in most of my talks, I'm talking about these tanmatras, because once we understand these tanmatras, we can play the game. Once we understand that the whole world is nothing more than waves at different frequencies and wavelengths, this is the way modern science, modern physics will view it. But a physicist will not experience it. They'll have it and they'll know it. But when it comes to going home and facing, financial problems or as classified in this way or difficulties and so on and so forth, in other words, life. Life means you cannot have a smoothness. It's like this. I know one of our devotees is an enthusiastic rugby player. And rugby, I was saying to a devotee yesterday, is a very interesting sport. Even Americans are not bold enough to play it. They play a form of football and they're dressed almost in medieval armor, padding here and padding there, and helmet here and so on and so forth. But the game of rugby is very different. And you go into it and you come out of it with bruises and cuts and maybe a broken nose and so on and so forth. But you come out with a very pleasing sense that you played the game well and you put all your energy into it. And it wasn't a game if there was no opposition players, and there was no game unless there was a ball, unless there was a way of handling it with certain skill, unless there was an element of practice. If you never practiced running and passing the ball and you do it after, let's say, 20 years, you'll huff and puff and you'll have a searing pain in your chest. And so this life requires a practice. If we're viewing it as a game, we have to take it with a sporting attitude, and that requires practice. How often should we practice? Whenever a second presents itself. Whenever a second presents itself, we have the opportunity, let me put something glorious in it. Let me put a reality into it. Let me put my beloved Lord into it. Let me put something that is highly joyful within it. Let every moment be joyful. Why not? Given the choice and the opportunity and the capacity to put joy into every second, why don't we do it? It's up to us. And then what we will find is that our approach, our handling of life with its crests of waves and deep depressions, we will know how to handle it objectively. We'll have a different view of it, which will have a different effect, because the world in front of us will match our thinking movements. Thought will be expressed as these events. What is wrong with the world? Why did God make such a stupid, incredibly painful world? No. The Sankhya philosophers will say, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in such a God like that, a supervisory God that makes things difficult. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in anything like that. Well, how do you explain this difficult world? It is due to wrong thinking. Why don't we change our thinking? If you change your thinking, then the world itself changes, because thinking is a creative process, because the Creator is not distant in the clouds. It is there, deeply embedded within you, and is you, ultimately, at bottom, as a substrate. And when we realize it, we call it self-realization. And so these subtle waves, which we call tanmatras, they become compounded, and they take different proportions of themselves. And of the three modes of nature that we know of, that is sattva and rajas and tamas, sattva leads us to light and harmony. That's what we want. Rajas, that leads to egoistic pain-causing activity. That's we have to change it. We have to elevate it. We have to put the sattva in. And then tamas leads to inertness, a wrong perception, and it also leads to pain. So in this way, we can mold all these various external worlds, events of ourselves, of our daily experience. But all combinations, not all combinations, cause pain. For example, when they combine without our human intervention, then they produce the heavens with self-luminous bodies, and these will regulate the universe. They do it in their own ways. So they also manifest in the interspace when the non-luminous sound waves, etc., and so on, where these move. And you'll find that largely our world of grief is because of our interference. That is not to say that we don't act or move. No, we have to do it in a luminous way. We have to do it in a positive way. And so we can extend affirmations that whatever we make that affect the field around us that condenses and we call life itself. And we can make affirmations and make them all in such a way that they become mechanisms to transcend the limiting concept of I and mine. And that's where the key difficulty lies. And the unclarified identification with one body alone now becomes a harmless, seedless memory of ours. That is called self-realization. And then we have to take the space-time configuration. So we have to take the world of waves, and then we can take a space-time configuration of energy, and the yogic terminology would be prana, and the head and the limbs of one of or many can be valued as whirlpools of energy only. So all of this starts off with a sense of imagination, but we are living in a world where imagination is a high impact movement. We imagine there are fearful situations everywhere. We imagine that somebody thinks something about us. It's not real. And Patanjali classifies this as, translated as verbal delusion. It means I imagine something, it's not really there. And I imagine it by constructing words that are classified either as rajas or tamas. And I can easily use the same words and make a classification within sattva. Why not? I can do that. But we have to understand this. There's an abiding totality that is there. And it expresses itself progressively, and we call this the world. And the felt divisions of what we call our world, what has been described as a merely a waking state, are thus transcended. And we can do it smoothly, we can do it knowingly, no jerking movements, no radical changes. We do it progressively, in a sure way, in a way that is peaceful, in a way that is solid, in a way that is secure, in a way that is steady. And in that sense, I and mine, they don't bind us anymore, which means we still operate in the world and we are self-realized. Because we realize two things: the nature of our own self, and we also know that not just that the world is different from it, no, the world is an expression of it. That's a very, very big difference. There are many, many philosophical schools that classify a dualism and says the divine is good and the world is bad. We reject the one and we accept the other. No. This philosophy tells us we integrate the two. Nitya and Lila are integrated. And you cannot have the Lila without the Nitya. And the Nitya chooses, as it were, to express itself as the Lila, as the game. Let us go on with this text. It is all play, a game with him. Make him as your companion. Know life to be a game in which Mother herself, that is pure energy, is the player and you are her playmate. Then life becomes a delightful thing. We want to avoid it. The world will be quite different when you know that Mother is playing with you. Yes, exactly. So come back to the question. What is our interpretation of playing the game? I think we've described. Even in these bad moments, there are no bad moments. And you have also said that God is not an examiner? No. How can that be? If that whole world is that, then there's no examiner. That is a form of dualism, which is extremely primitive. We can start out like that. But it means that we are far removed from the truth. We only have some intellectual understanding or fear-based understanding of it. And if the terrible moments, there are no terrible moments, are not for testing, which they're not, how do we understand that game? And I think I've described how we do it. We do it with an attitude of great enthusiasm. We have to, if it's a game, we have to be a player. And if we have a God, our God has to be our playmate. And that's will be the answer to the question. So I hope I've answered both questions now.
Swamiji, one story that confuses me is this Kalpatru Day story of the devotee called Vaikuntnath who gets the boon from Sri Ramakrishna, and he sees Sri Ramakrishna everywhere for a few days. And then he comes back and he wants to return this boon. So I would have thought that seeing the divine everywhere for a few days is the same as this event called self-realization. But it seems that he just comes back and he wants to return it back. So that's what confuses me quite a lot.
Yes, because you see, sometimes we ask for something and we can't handle it because our interpretation, our attachment to the world is different. We can't do it anymore. We've asked for something that we're not ready for. You know, Krishna must have known that. Let me see your face everywhere, you see. But then what about the practical day-to-day things in life? I can't do them anymore. Oh, okay. You got it all of a sudden. And growth is not really, I suppose, so valuable if it's all of a sudden, because it's no longer a game. And I'm tying these two questions together, you see. If you take it as a game, then you'll be happy to play the game. And conversely, and Ramakrishna also stated, you see, you are so lucky. You're still in the game. I'm now out of the game. we would put it the other way around, isn't it? And he's saying life is not a crime. So yes, I'm giving you a boon. You now have a different way of seeing things. But yeah, are you really ready for that? Please take it back. We have an equivalent understanding, you see. Arjuna asking Krishna, oh, please give me the cosmic vision. And after seeing the cosmic vision, Krishna says, oh, please take it back. I can't handle it.
But then I thought that isn't it, so what is self-realization? Is it not seeing the divine everywhere?
Well, yes, but first of all, it's seeing the divine in yourself profoundly in such a way, in the language I've just described. It's okay, I understand Nitya and Leela together. When I understand it together, that's fine. But understanding, is it easy to understand such a thing? Theoretically, we can get it in a flash. Ramakrishna's example, you see. The cave is dark for 1,000 years. How long does it take to light it? You strike a match and it's finished. Well, why doesn't it happen like that? Because our evaluation of the world, we prefer the darkness, if you want to use that same language. We want to light the match, but we don't know where the matches are. And then when we find the match, we hesitate. Very equivalent to Plato's cave, Plato's shadows in the cave, you see. As long as we have this I and mine, we don't have the realization of who I am. I am that. So that is self-realization. A temporary flash of it won't give it to you. It'll be an established understanding that perpetuates through your working, waking experience and doesn't mean that you don't do what other people do. If you're a cobbler, you'll continue mending shoes. If you're a housewife, you'll still continue with your chores. If you're an accountant, you'll continue your accountancy. If you're a university lecturer, you'll continue doing that. Nobody will notice. Mother's language, you don't grow two horns on your head. Nothing will change. The mother is a beautiful example of this. People who saw the Holy Mother there in South India, they mistook her companion, who was much more impressive. And they didn't see this so-called ordinary woman in the same light. So there's nothing that will show that you're different. You know, if you take all the monks, all the monks of the Ramakrishna order, and you dress them up in collar and tie, and they walk around the streets of Dublin, let's say, you won't see any difference. You'll think they're ordinary people. There'll be nothing special about them. So we continue working. It's not that we are saying, okay, I'm self-realized, I don't have to be in this world anymore. That's not the whole thing. You'll want to play the game, isn't it? Continue playing the game in a revalued way. And playing the game means I don't see it as a life attacking me, where I have to defend myself. In fact, quite the opposite. And I have to tell you, personally speaking, wherever I find a so-called obstacle or something like that, then I don't see it as an insurmountable obstacle. But I see I'm ready, I'm well equipped to deal with it. And I move toward it, not away from it. In Zimbabwe, we have something called a rain spider. We know when the rains are coming because there's a particular spider. It varies in size, but let's say it's that long, several inches. And it's harmless. It might, if it bites you, you might get a little bit of a swelling somewhere, but it's not toxic. And most spiders will move away from you. You make a movement, it runs away. This one runs toward you. And even the most confident people end up on a chair or something. Oh, the spider's after me, but how can it be? I'm this big and the spider's only this big. It's all in our imagination. But it's moving toward you. It's a wonderful lesson. You move toward it because as soon as you move toward it, it dissolves. Because the only thing that's standing there is God dressed up. Finished. And every atom is that thing, that divine being, appearing like this. And in the laboratory, let's say the big laboratory, this large laboratory, the Large Hadron Collider, appears and disappears like that, a flash. As soon as it comes, it's gone. It's difficult to catch it. You need a lot of data to catch it in any way and determine what is it, what is it, what is it. So that is it. You look at life properly, it's these series of flashes that come and go. But we are designed to see it as a continuous thing, as something that seems to be solid until we dream. And then it all goes into vague area. And then it blanks off totally, and it's called a dreamless sleep. And when we realize, when there's a self-realization, I am the observer of these three states of consciousness, we can enter into the world that is really the waking state and say, let me play the game today. Let me play it well. If life is a game, we should play it well, as best as we possibly can. And the playing the game well, if you want to classify it in terms, is called karma yoga. Karma yoga is not there to get something. All these yogas are only there to purify the mind as a process. But when the mind is purified, you see this, the self as it is in its pristine condition. The waves don't go away. The person goes and enters into it and becomes useful and plays the game with a completely different attitude. Totally different attitude, with the capacity to transform something at a look or a touch or a thought. Yogananda Paramahansa established something called Self-Realization Fellowship. I don't suppose everybody who joins it is realized. They think that self-realization is a future event, but then you see the contradiction in terms. You're realizing yourself, but yourself is always with you, as it were. It's not that you'll discover yourself in the future. There's a wonderful cartoon, So there's a mountain, and the cartoon starts with a businessman in a suit and a briefcase. And there's a sign going to go to the top of the mountain, discover yourself, self-realization. He climbs up, he gets to the top, and at the top, there's an absolute duplicate of himself, a man with a briefcase and a suit. So it's not something to be discovered in the future. Self-realization means I realize the depth of my own being here and now. And once I do that, because realization doesn't go away, that's the difference. You see, you can have visions and you can have sights and so on and so forth, but self-realization does not go away because it's a contradiction in terms. Realizing, it's an aha moment. Aha, that is who I am. That is me, not intellectually, but as a fact of experience. And when that is there, and then you open your eyes, as it were, you say, oh, I'm everywhere. I myself am everywhere. And for convenience sake, let me say I'm an individual entity, a player, a co-player, a co-companion, a playmate. And then there's the mother of the universe that is there in front of me, playing the game in a twofold way, as waves, Gautam mantras on the one side, and then as an abiding totality on the other side. Abiding totality is called Nitya. Tanmatras is called Lila. And we don't contradict the two. We take the both. So self-realization is not self-annihilation. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you, Swamiji.
Now, one important thing that I always quote from the Yoga Sutras, it's in the first chapter, it's the 21st sutra, aphorism, and it says that success is speedy, it's accelerated for the extremely energetic. And then the sutra after that, that is 22, will add that success differs according to the means adopted, whether they are mild or medium or intense. It's the same with anything. It's to do with concentration. So there's a need to apply these steps with great skill and great regularity. And above all, with an element of patience and calm. And if we don't have that, a sudden flash of it will not be satisfactory. You see, if you take this philosophy correctly and compare it to a sport of any kind, or even to learning a language, at the moment I'm learning a language, or playing a musical instrument, then you'll know that regularity is important, and skill is important, patience is important, enthusiasm is important, and all of these things are important. The only difference is we normally put it in the language of achieving something with the goal here, and I'm here. And spiritual life is not like that, but requires the same skills, attributes, and qualities. And we have to apply that in our spiritual endeavor, and that is what these Yoga Sutras mean. And we can, we have to apply. It's like, hot food, food that is highly spicy. Is it mild? Is it medium? Is it hot? And so same thing with concentration. All right, we leave it there then. Okay. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Okay.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you. Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.